The story of Christopher Columbus discovering America has long been told in schools and history books, yet it remains one of the most hotly debated tales of world history. Can it really be called a discovery when the continents of the Americas were already inhabited by millions of indigenous people who had built civilizations for centuries? Even beyond that, Columbus never actually set foot on what we now think of as North America. His voyages brought him to the Caribbean islands and parts of Central and South America. So why has Columbus become the figure most associated with European discovery of the New World? This question leads us to an often overlooked chapter in history that happened almost 500 years before Columbus ever set sail. The Vikings, led by a man named Leif Erikson, may have been the first Europeans to step onto the shores of North America. His journey has become the subject of both legend and fact, and in recent decades, new archaeological evidence has given greater weight to the idea that Erikson truly reached the continent long before Columbus was even born. Leif Erikson was born around the year 970 in Iceland. He was the son of the well-known Viking explorer Eric the Red. Eric himself was no stranger to controversy. His father had been banished from Norway for manslaughter, and eventually Eric, too, was exiled from Iceland for killing a neighbor. With no home left in Iceland, he sailed west and founded a settlement in Greenland. Leif grew up in this environment of exile exploration and resilience, and it shaped the way he saw the world that as a young man, Leif traveled to Norway where he met King Olaf I of Norway. The king persuaded Leif to convert to Christianity and tasked him with returning to Greenland to spread the new faith among the pagan settlers there. But, according to the sagas of Iceland, what followed was far more adventurous than a simple mission of conversion. The story of Leif Erikson's journey comes to us through two Icelandic sagas that were first passed down orally for generations, before being written down centuries later. These sagas, the saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red, offer two slightly different versions of what happened. In both versions, the events take place around the year 1000, but the details differ. In the saga of the Greenlanders, the story begins with a man named Bjarni Herjolfsson, an Icelandic trader. Around the year 986, Bjarni set out for Greenland, but was blown off course. Instead of reaching his destination, he sighted unknown lands further to the west. He never landed on them, but he told others what he had seen. Years later, when Leif Erikson heard the tale, he became fascinated with the idea of this mysterious land. Unlike Bjarni, he wanted to set foot on it and see it with his own eyes. Leif gathered a crew of about 35 men and prepared a ship for the long voyage across the Atlantic. Following Bjarni's route, he eventually reached the shores of North America. The first place they landed he named Helluland, which means land of flat stones. Modern historians believe this was likely Baffin Island in northern Canada. Moving further south, they reached a place rich in forests which Leif called Markland, meaning forest land, probably located in what is now Labrador. Continuing south, the Vikings finally arrived at a region that was more hospitable than anything they had yet seen. The weather was milder, the rivers were full of salmon, and the land was lush with greenery. Most famously, they found wild grapes growing in abundance. Because of this, Leif named the place Vinland, meaning wineland. Many scholars believe this was on the northern tip of Newfoundland, where the Vikings set up a camp for the winter. Here the Vikings built houses and spent their time exploring hunting and fishing. They enjoyed the bounty of the New World, but after the winter ended, they sailed back to Greenland carrying stories of this remarkable land. According to this version of the saga, Leif had deliberately sought out and discovered North America based on Bjarni's account. The other version. The saga of Eric the Red tells a slightly different story. In this account, Leif was not on an intentional voyage of discovery. Instead, he was returning from Norway to Greenland when storms blew him off course and he accidentally reached the shores of North America. In this version, Vinland was not discovered through careful planning, but rather by chance. No matter which saga you choose to believe, both agree on one thing. Leif Erikson and his men reached the continent of North America around the year 1000, which is nearly 5 centuries before Columbus ever sailed westward. After Leif returned to Greenland, he inherited leadership of the colony following the death of his father, Eric the Red. He never again returned to North America, but other Vikings did. One of his brothers Thorvald attempted his own voyage to Vinland. For a time, he and his crew explored the new land, but eventually they clashed with the native inhabitants. In one of these encounters, Thorvald was killed by arrows, making him the first known European to die and be buried in North America. Other expeditions followed, but none of them resulted in a lasting colony. The Vikings seemed unable to maintain a permanent settlement, perhaps due to the distance, the harsh conditions, and the resistance of the local populations. For centuries, the stories of Vinland remained little more than legend. Many historians doubted that the sagas described real events. But in the 20th century, archaeological discoveries began to change this perception. In 1960, the Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Anne Stein Ingstad, uncovered the remains of a Viking settlement at Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland. Excavations revealed the foundations of Norse-style houses and artifacts that clearly link the site to Viking explorers. These findings provided the first solid proof that Vikings had indeed reached North America. Radiocarbon dating placed the settlement around the same time as Leif Erikson's supposed voyage. Later studies confirmed this further. In 2021, scientists analyzed wood from the site and found evidence that it had been cut by metal tools in the year 1021. This precise dating offered remarkable confirmation that Vikings were in North America, around the same era described in the sagas. While some details of the sagas may have been exaggerated or altered over time, the archaeological evidence makes it clear that the stories are grounded in truth. The Vikings reached North America long before Columbus and established at least a temporary settlement. Even if it did not last, their achievement represents the first known European presence on the continent. This brings us back to the question of discovery. Can we really say that Columbus discovered America when the land was already home to countless indigenous nations and civilizations? The Vikings, too, did not find an empty land. They encountered native peoples, and their attempts at settlement quickly brought conflict. Discovery in this sense did not mean finding a place unknown to humanity, but rather making it known to Europeans. By that definition, Leif Erikson deserves recognition as the first European to set foot in North America, yet history does not always reward the first. Columbus's voyages had a lasting impact because they set off a wave of exploration, colonization, and conquest that permanently link the Old World and the New. Leif's expedition, by contrast, was a remarkable achievement, but it did not lead to lasting settlement or lasting contact. After a few failed attempts, the Vikings abandoned the idea of colonizing Vinland, and their journeys faded into legend. Still, the legacy of Leif Erikson endures. In 1964, United States President Lyndon Johnson proclaimed October 9th as Leif Erikson Day, a date chosen to honor not only Leif's voyage but also the arrival of the first large group of Norwegian immigrants to America in 1825. Today, the site at Meadows is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, preserved as a testament to the Viking explorers who crossed the Atlantic 1,000 years ago. So who truly discovered America? Was it Columbus who opened the floodgates of European expansion into the Americas in 1492? Was it Leif Erikson who led a small band of Vikings across the ocean around the year 1000? Or should we instead recognize the indigenous peoples who had lived on these lands for millennia before any Europeans set eyes on them? The answer depends on how we define discovery. What we can say for certain is that history is richer and more complex than the simple stories we were once taught. Columbus and Erikson were both explorers whose voyages had consequences both good and tragic. Columbus's journeys brought European empires to the New World, changing history forever. but also unleashing conquest disease and colonization upon indigenous peoples. Erikson's expedition revealed that the Atlantic was crossable long before Columbus and showed that the Vikings were capable of reaching lands far beyond Europe. In the end, it is fair to say that technically the Vikings were the first Europeans to reach North America. They built settlements, they explored the coasts, and they left behind traces of their presence that still survive today. Their story may not have reshaped the world in the way Columbus's voyages did, but it remains one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of exploration.